waiting for that to happen to me.
Now, another character that pops back up is Jack McAvoy.
Hmm.
Um, why did you decide to bring Jack back in the story? And are there any particular challenges trying to integrate a former character into a story?
That was part of the evil plan, the long range plan. I wanted to write a book about the state of journalism as a backdrop. You know, it would still be a thriller, but um, and so I thought I'm going to write about Jack McAvoy, who was the main character of a book I wrote 10 years ago called The Poet, and to bring him back in my next book. I wanted to set up things in this book. So he has a very small part in the Brass Verdict where he shows up as a reporter for the Los Angeles Times. And so I just dropped him in there a couple times, and that kind of sets up the next book, which is about his last week as a reporter at the LA Times.
Now, what was your last week as a reporter like?
Um, it was tough because I wrote, I think it was two and a half of my books, my first two and a half books, I wrote while working as a full time reporter. And so I was reaching this point where the books were having some success. They certainly had more of my attention, and I was wondering, am I, hurting myself as a reporter? Am I all the reporter I could be or should be? And I took a sabbatical, a 6 month sabbatical, to finish my third book. And during that period where I was working full time on a book and not having to go put it aside every day and go to the newspaper and write something else, um, I realized that I don't want to do both jobs. And so I came back. I made good on my promise to come back after sabbatical, and I lasted about 2 months, and they were the most miserable 2 months of my life because all I wanted to do was write my books. But I felt like I had to. Uh, Out of duty to the newspaper where I was working, it was the Los Angeles Times as well. Put in some time, and while they looked around for my replacement, because the whole time I was on a sabbatical, they were counting on me coming back, and they weren't looking for a replacement. So I stayed 2 months, and the last week might have had an uplift because I knew it was the last week. But those 2 months where I came back were a tough time in my life.
Now, you wrote about crime for many, many years in Florida and Los Angeles, and then you go into writing fiction and you write about crimes. Why did you decide to stay in those dark waters?
One was a means to an end. I was in college, and when I discovered the work of Raymond Chandler and other crime fiction, and I decided this is what I want to do. I want to try to write crime novels that are more than a puzzle, that evoke a place and a time and a character and their journey. That was very inspiring to me, and so that's what I wanted to do. So the next question was, well, if you want to write about, even in fiction, the world of crime, you got to know something about it, don't you? So what? How do I get there? And I could, of course, quit college and become a police officer and maybe become a detective and learn it firsthand. But that really, I don't have the temperament for that. I don't think so. So the next idea was to go into journalism, get a journalism degree, get into a newspaper, hopefully get a police pass, cover crime, and get at least kind of like a front row seat on that world. And so that's what I was doing. So all the time I was writing for newspapers and working on the crime beat or sometimes the court beat. I had this ulterior motive or hidden motive in the back of my mind that I was also observing things so that I could possibly use them at some point to write novels. And so it kind of worked out. It seems like a grand scheme, but it really wasn't. It was kind of a hope. It's hard to say I'm going to write novels and then actually have it happen. It seems like a long shot.
Now, is there more of a difference between writing nonfiction and fiction, other than in nonfiction you're trying to force a narrative on a set of facts, and in fiction you're trying to create facts that make a narrative believable?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I think in my case, I've tried not to think about it too much because it might drag me down and I'd be sitting there and unable to write. I see a lot of connections between both. I mean, because I did both. I wrote nonfiction in the form of newspaper stories for 14 years, and I was writing every day I worked, and sometimes I was writing many stories, and then for about that 6 year, almost actually more, about a 9 year period, I was doing both, and I would work all day at the newspaper, and then at night I would write fiction, and I felt that they fed off of each other, and certainly I believe my fictional work is really based on my reporting work. In fact, it's weird. I don't feel like I'm a novelist. I feel like I'm a reporter, and most of my work comes out of following reportorial routines in terms of research and writing. In the only difference is in newspapers, you never have enough room to say what you want to say in your story. So you learn to write short and sweet and to the point, and you try not to use any dialogue that doesn't impart information. You don't use throwaway dialogue, and I've taken all that into my fiction for the most part. And I think somebody who's really schooled in journalism would look at my fiction and could tell I've been a reporter or am a reporter.
Did that discipline of being an everyday writer reporter really help you come along to being able to meet a 1-a-year cycle?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and no, I don't actually have deadlines. I write books at the pace I feel I want to write them, and it has turned out to be about 1 a year. Sometimes I've done 2 a year. I think next year I'm going to end up having 2 a year because I'm kind of ahead of the game. I already have my next book done. But yeah, I mean, you have a work ethic in the newspaper room office, and you have to write every day. That's the way it is. I mean, you always hear this stuff about writers having writer's block and so forth. I mean, that's an unheard of term in a newsroom. You can never go to your editor and say, I can't write this murder story today. I'm having writer's block. They would just kick you out. So you have to do it, and it's kind of given me a work ethic where I write every day. I mean, I don't think I've ever had writer's block. I've had days where I know it's not going that well, but I plow through it and know that I can come back in the editing process and fix it and make it better and so forth. But, I think the newspaper work gave me a sense of momentum to keep writing, keep it going, write like a shark, don't stop. And, you can always circle around and make things better, but keep your momentum.
And you've been able